Hello, my name is Sarah Starks. I chose to write my Isms paper on linguicism and the struggle that many teachers face with communicating with ESL families. The question I set out to answer was, why are teachers less likely to communicate with ESL families? My purpose for writing this paper was to understand why myself and many teachers struggle to communicate effectively with ESL families. I chose this topic because throughout this course, I have become aware of my own personal biases that I have with my ESL families and how those biases are impacting my students' success. What I found was effectively communicating with ESL parents is difficult due to two reasons. The number one reason being educational and language barriers among these families. And the second reason was because many cultures do not view education and the role of the teacher and parent the same way that we do here in the United States. Deficit perspective is an educational theory that views an individual's lack of achievement or academic success as being solely based on the inadequacies of their home environment and their culture. Linguicism is a form of discrimination solely based on the language an individual speaks. When you combine that with deficit perspective, I think it takes the responsibility away from the teacher, and instead of considering what we can do differently to help the student be more successful, we pinpoint it to the inadequacies of the parents, and we do not take into consideration any other factors that would contribute to their lack of success. Throughout my research, I was able to identify two reasons why communication with ESL families is particularly difficult for teachers. The first one being language and educational barriers between the teacher and the families. The second reason being that other cultures have different educational norms and they view the role of the teacher and parent differently than we do in the United States. The first two barriers I identified as making communication with ESL families difficult were language and educational barriers. The most obvious to me of those barriers was the parents' lack of English knowledge. When you communicate with anyone, but in this situation, parents of your ESL students, it is difficult to effectively communicate when neither one of you speak the same language. Another barrier that I identified was lack of education, specifically with the parents of the ESL families. Many immigrants coming into our country were coming here for a better opportunity, not only for themselves, but for their families. In their native country, they may have lacked access to education. And when you combine those two together, that individual parent might feel very insecure about communicating with their teacher because they do not have the knowledge base and they do not have the language base necessary to understand what you're talking about. And this can make them feel very uncomfortable. Another communication barrier that I found during my research was one that I myself had never considered. And that barrier is the difference in cultural norms. Other countries do not share beliefs about education and the role of the teacher and the importance of family engagement that we do here in the United States. In other cultures, the role of the teacher is highly valued as being the expert, and they trust that their students are getting the best education and that the teacher knows how to do that in the best way so they stay out of it. They view the family's role as being the ones who instill the morals and the values and enforce the discipline with the students. For us as teachers in the United States, we do not understand this, and in my case, did not consider this. And it was interpreted as a bias where I just assumed that these parents did not care about their child's education and their academic achievement. So, what can we do as educators to eliminate some of the communication barriers that we have between us and our ESL families? One thing we can do is to consider personal or home visits with the families. And during these visits, we can not only share with them our concerns that we have about the child's success and academic achievement, but we can also share with them our expectations for the role that they can play in their child's education. Another thing to consider is that to be creative in how you communicate with these families, given the difference among cultural norms and the insecurities that some of these parents have because of their lack of understanding, these ESL parents will likely not respond to traditional forms of communication. Another thing we can do is provide translation resources. If we do stick to traditional forms of communication, such as handouts and flyers and notes, we can have those handouts, flyers, or notes translated into the parent's native language where they can read it and understand it. Another way to eliminate a barrier would be to make family resources easily accessible. Make sure that your family resource center in your school is front and center and obvious and opening and welcoming to all families. And another one, and of course it's the one that I never considered, was to provide culturally specific resources. Um, with the difference in educational norms varying across cultures, what one culture might need to help them may not be the same thing that another culture needs to help them. So if we provide culturally specific resources for our families, then we can meet their individual needs.